Devotion 1, where we were seeing just tons of red, white, splash black, red, white, splash blue. So back when Devotion was a very popular deck, we're thinking, you know, Mastery of the Unseen going around. Word was the way to beat it was to go take to the air. We wanted Mantis Riders, we wanted Storm Breath Dragons. Now, ever since Hangerback Walker and Siege Rhino had their way with Standard, this hasn't happened too much, but John should be a pretty good favorite here. He can attack in the air very easily, and Man does not have many ways to stop it.
I know you see Steve is starting off with the Temple of Triumph. That's a red-white dual end, but we promise he has green-red Devotion. He just has one as kind of a makeshift mountain. Now there's a Sylvan Caryatid, there's a little of acceleration. So Man is off to a nice start here. Now, like you said, I don't think this is a matchup he's particularly thrilled with. There's a lot of flying going on here. And we're talking about green-red Devotion, a deck that doesn't have very much removal, so a card like Jace or Soulfire Grandmaster, those are premium 2-drops in the matchup too. Yeah, Jace, it's unlikely that Steve will actually be able to kill the Jace, so John will get lots of free loots off it. Those flashbacks will be relevant. And it's interesting, the Jeskai Dragons has been successful at this tournament, not because of this matchup, though it's a great matchup for it, but it's because it's one of these decks that gets to play cards like Magma Spray, these like Draconic or these clean, or Jeskai Charm, these clean answers to things like Hangerback Walker and some of the Obs on aggro creatures. So Goss does just start for the Jace. Steve Man here with another copy of Sylvan Caryatid. And he's also got a Rattleclaw Mystic. So acceleration, not a problem. Maybe we'll see a Dragonlord Tarka next turn. Who knows? Yeah, 3 mana creatures, 3 lands. He can make a 7-drop on turn 4. Now, I'm in agreement with you on the whole. I think this matchup was actually pretty bad for Steve because of how much flying Goss has in his deck. That said, one of the nice things about green-red Devotion is sometimes, well, they'll just push you around and overpower you. Right, I mean, you mentioned a possibility of a turn 4 Atarka. That's pretty reasonable here, and will be excellent against a deck like Jeskai. Dig Through Time is the card discarded off of Jace. Goss, unsure of what 3rd land he wants to play. And when you think about the Haymakers in Devotion, there are cards like Pelucranos, Whisperwood Elemental, and Atarka. Now, the removal spells in John's deck is that he has 3 Valor Stance, and there's a lot of pressure on those, and he has 1 Roast. But the Valor Stance is only raised to deal with Atarka, at least in the main deck. So with the right finisher, Steve can pull this game out of reach. Mantis Rider is here, going to come in for 3 points of damage. Now, pretty classic rule of thumb with Mantis Rider is if it hits you twice, you're probably lost. You get burnt out, or if it hits you twice, so it's probably going to hit you a 3rd time. Well, it's gotten in here once, and we know that green-red Devotion has a real problem with this card, especially game number 1. Sometimes for sideboard options, you know, they've got Arbor Colossus and Plummets and things of that nature, but we're talking game 1 right now, so big stress on Dragonlord Atarka or Pelucranos plus a bunch of mana. Yeah, and those 2 things you mentioned are actually the only answers in the main deck for Steve. He's not playing any copies of something like Crater's Claws, no removal in the main. He actually has no way to kill Mantis Rider. Man is tapping some mana. Perhaps it's Xenagos time. It is. He's just going to have to overpower the Mantis Rider, which with this draw is possible. Now here's Whispered Elemental. That'll bring a Manifest along with it. So, again, as we mentioned, this is part of the appeal of green-red Devotion where, yeah, I'm in a pretty tough matchup against a deck with a lot of flying and some burn, but how about a Whispered Elemental? Bring along a Manifest. How about Xenagos pumping out Satyrs? How about if I draw a Dragonlord Atarka or a Genesis Hydra? Life's pretty good. That's what he's got to try to do right now. Yeah, so he has a lot of creatures, a lot of threats on his side. There's still a danger, actually, that if John has another Mantis Rider here, that 6 damage per turn will actually win the game faster than Steve's large threats can. Yeah. And I think that's why it's an advantage. Is think about all the things that had to go right for Steve to get this. He had to have 3 mana creatures, Xenagos, Whisperwood, and all John has to do is play lands and Mantis Rider. His equation is very simple and comes together a lot more often. John, a lot to think about this turn. You know, you always are trying to figure out what that manifest may be. You're just hoping, okay, it's not a Dragonlord Atarka, hopefully it's an irrelevant mana creature or something of that nature. So you try not to focus too much attention on that. He's going to start with a Jace activation. Yeah, well, if Steve hadn't plussed the Xenagos, John would have the option of attacking Xenagos with Mantis Rider, taking it down, maybe using a removal spell on Whisperwood, and playing a slower game. But because Xenagos is at 4, dealing with Xenagos will likely cost John his attack and a spell in his hand. And that's awfully slow when your opponent gets to keep Whisperwood Elemental around. Yeah, and for me, I would just want to ignore it at this point. Xenagos is scary to have around, yes, with the amount of mana that it can generate for a Genesis Hydra, but you know, I don't think I'm going to win this game by knocking it down to 1 and then killing it the next turn. That's basically 2 fogs.
Exactly. And you just pointed on the thing that the danger of it keeping around is if Steve has anything simple like a Genesis Hydra, then we might see something like Genesis Hydra into Dragon Lord Atarka, or these really powerful plays that will sweep John's board. Even Pelucranos is pretty good.
Boy, John is going to discard a copy of Stormbreath Dragon. That is pretty telling if he's putting that card in the graveyard.
Well, I believe he has another Mantis Rider. That could knock Steve down to 11. And the numbers just don't add up perfect here. So if he had the mana to go another Mantis Rider this turn and a Stormbreath on turn 5, it would knock Steve down to 1 on turn 5, not 0.
There's your second Mantis Rider. Coming on in. I like that he is attacking Steve and not the Xenagos. Mystic Monastery passed the turn back. If you're John, you were just crossing your fingers and hoping that this Green Red Devotion deck doesn't vomit up something insane. But it has the propensity of doing just that.
You're not wrong. Now, the damage from Jeskai is a little more honest than sometimes you'd expect. An attack like Mantis Riders plus Stoke the Flames used to be a very big possibility. John's deck, because of this Dragon package, Thunderbreak, Regent Sense, Stormbreaths, is not playing any copies of Stoke the Flames. He has 2 exquisite Firecrafts in the burn spot, and that speaks a lot to the fact that his creatures are larger. He doesn't convoke very well. He'd rather just have the extra utility of having a Firecraft be a mana cheaper and having some upside. But you're right. Does Steve have a Pelucranos or a Genesis Hydra? Either of those should grab the game for him. Even a Dragon Lord Atarka in his hand will be hard for John to beat. The advantage to Pelucranos is if he manifests into Pelucranos with Whisperwood, that should also be good enough.
Yeah, it's probably good enough, I would think.
And it looks like the Dragon Lord is in his hand.
Yeah. And that is not great for John Goss. What Steve's trying to do right now is he's trying to identify what he can attack with. Now, if I am being attacked right now by Rattleclaw Mystic, I'm not feeling good about this game.
Yeah, well, there's a couple ways you can read this if you're John. Maybe Steve's attacking out of a position of strength. Maybe he's, if you actually think Steve doesn't have a finisher, perhaps this is an attack out of a position of weakness. Mm-hmm. It could represent a lot of things, and we see John just taking all the damage.
What it is mostly is a really good attack.
Yeah, I think it's just an excellent attack on Steve's part.
Because that makes John think a lot about what he can have or what he may not have. Is he bluffing? Is he not? If, for example, John had just blocked both 2-power creatures, the Manifest and the Rattleclaw Mystic, with both copies of Mantis Rider, that's fine. Steve gets to play Dragon Lord Atarka, 1 to each Mantis Rider, and then kill Jace as well. As it stands, this Dragon Lord Atarka is still great. Kills Jace, kills Mantis Rider. You got an 8/8 back on defense and soon enough on offense. So if you're Steve, you got to love your positioning.
Yeah, he has so many threats in play. He has a healthy enough life total that he doesn't need to worry about being burned out. It seems impossible that John will be able to survive the next attack. And we may be headed to a game 2.
Yeah, with this board that Steve has built up here, we're not going to find any sweepers in this Jeskai Dragons deck, so there's really no way to come back from this. And again, this is part of the appeal of playing Green Red Devotion is, yes, we think that Jeskai Dragons is well positioned here. They have so many flyers, Stormbreath Dragon, Thunderbreak Regent, Mantis Rider. They've got burn spells, maybe a little bit of counter magic after sideboard, but sometimes Green Red Devotion just shows, I don't care.
Yeah, and a lot of this is that John's main deck is positioned to fight different decks than Devotion. 4 copies of Draconic Roar are in his main deck. That's not particularly strong in this matchup. Post-board, I think John will get a lot of extra value. But game 1, yeah, he's very susceptible to just mana creatures, something big.
And for what it's worth, John's start was great.
2 Mantis Riders? Absolutely.
Jace to get the party started, Mantis Rider. Now you've got Rose that's going to go after Whisperwood Elemental. But this is just the passing of the turn. So Steve will get to untap 2 Manifest, Dragon Lord Atarka, active Xenagos over there, a boatload of mana.
Right, and even though John had a removal spell for one of Steve's best cards, there's this snowball effect that Green Red Devotion tends to have. Once you get a Whisperwood, it makes more creatures to make your Xenagos better. Your Xenagos being better makes your Genesis Hydra better, which then makes your next card better. Everything's compounding. See Steve even with another Genesis Hydra in his hand. May not need to play it.
It's hard to pass it up. All that
It's
mana.
fun. I mean, you sure have a right.
I don't want to say no to that.
Xenagos Colossus for 7. 3 more lands, 4 mana creatures. It's a Hydra for 12.
Yeah, it's pretty big. Certainly bringing something relevant along with it.
Sure, I bet your top 12 cards have something good in them.
Yeah. Steve, very methodical in his ways. He's going to make sure he doesn't make a mistake. And, you know, truth be told, when we saw the attack that we saw last turn, it took him a minute to figure out that attack, but that was a perfect attack last turn.
You got a lot of extra damage. I really liked it.
So the Xenagos elevator might be going up, might be making a Satyr token. It's unclear what Steve wants to do with it just yet. But for number 30 on our Season 3 leaderboard and former player in the Players' Championship last year, he knows his way around a green-red devotion deck. And he's making a deep run here with it, and it looks like game number 1 is certainly in his favor right now.
Yeah, if he makes a Satyr, he's still a removal spell on Dragon Lord would leave John at 1.
Here's a backup Xenagos.
But 2 Satyrs, and now the attack is lethal even through a kill spell.
Steve Mann going to win game number 1 here over John Goss. Green Red Devotion up a game over Jeskai Dragons. You saw Mann take his time that turn, figure out what the best line of play is. Me, I just wanted to cash Genesis Hydra for $1 million and have some fun. He wanted to figure out the best line to win the game.
Yeah, his play certainly wasn't as flashy, but it won very convincingly.
That's why he's down there and I'm in here as we take a look at the sideboards now. We'll start with John Goss and his Jeskai Dragons deck. You've got that in front of you. What do we see?
All right, well, the big play is that John can adapt his spell package to better fit this matchup. Rather than being so heavy on things like Draconic Roar or Magma Spray, he has 3 Disdainful Strokes in his sideboard, which will be excellent against a Devotion deck. A lot of times they're hinging on one spell to do a lot of their work. Other cards in his sideboard, he has a copy of Elspeth, 3 copies of Anger of the Gods. That has always been a good player against a Devotion strategy. 2 copies of Tragic Arrogance. So those 8 cards, the Tragic Arrogance, the Disdainful Stroke, and the Anger of Gods should all be pretty good in this matchup, and I think will turn things in his favor post-boards.
We'll take a look here at Steve Mann's sideboard. He's got a couple copies of Rending Volley. He's got 2 Seismic Ruptures, 3 Mistcutter Hydras, 2 Arbor Colossus, a See the Unwritten, 3 Nightly Disciples, a Roast, and a Nissa Worldwaker.
Well, for Mann's side, I think he'd like to have some threats that are more difficult to answer. Mistcutter Hydra definitely can be a player in that way. It can't be countered by Disdainful Stroke. Arbor Colossus blocks flyers, which is a huge problem out of John's deck. Rending Volley as a 2 of, it's a good answer to Mantis Rider, though it's short on targets in this matchup. So it'll be interesting to see whether he goes to them. I think when he's on the draw, he may need them just because a turn 3 Mantis Rider is so much of a threat.
Well, these players will shuffle up and get ready here for game number 2. John Goss will be on the play. In the meantime, we will talk about our Season 2 Invitational Champion. That, of course, is Ali Antrazi and his beautiful Angel token with his son Aiden in hand. Couple of ways you can go about getting this thing, even though there's not a lot of time left since we're going to have a new one after this Invitational is over. It goes to all Open Series players who are playing in our main events. We've also got these being given away to all 5K Premier IQ players. And then last but certainly not least, in all orders from StarCityGames.com, $5 minimum order, Season 2 Invitational Champion, Ali Antrazi. He is our 4/4 Angel token, and he will be playing in our Players' Championship later this year at the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia. And perhaps one of these 2 players that we're watching right now will be in John Goss and Steve Mann. Last year, we got to see Steve Mann do battle in that tournament, and you know, he, along with Logan Mize, 2 players from the Florida area who really do kind of fly under the radar, both in top 8 contention.
Yeah, they're both in top 8 contention, absolutely both needing to win out. Mann at 11-3 and Logan at 11-1. But yeah, both of them trying to get their way back to the Players' Championship. Neither of them are particularly high in the points race, so this invitational bid is important to both of them.
Mann, as I mentioned, very methodical in his ways. Definitely a thinking man's magic player, excuse me. Takes a lot of his time on his turn, but more often than not comes to a decision that is right. You saw that attack there with those 2 power creatures when he was going to play Dragon Lord Tarka, trying to figure out the best way to get value on that turn. And currently up a game with a deck, really? If you think about it, and I think about the pregame show, you know, we talked so much about Hangerback Walker this and Hangerback Walker that. We didn't really talk about Green Red Devotion all that much.
Yeah, well, Devotion, a sneakier deck. It can be good against Abzan decks. Certainly can overpower their draws. Now, it has some weakness to cards like Dramoka's Command, Corsair Crewfix can really be eaten by that. And I think that's why we've seen a shift more toward red devotion. Sometimes you see white devotion with cards like Mastery. You can't really play that in a Dromoka's Command metagame.
I am a little curious. Why don't we ever see any Hanger Back Walkers in Green Red Devotion? Is that just not a good enough payoff card?
Well, so Green Red Devotion is a really high synergy based deck. So when you have cards like Genesis Hydra, mana creatures, cards like Nykthos that really require this engine to get them working, Hangerback Walker sees play because it's just very solid. It's a value style card. You'll get a lot of cards out of it every time you play it. It'll slowly get bigger, but that sort of slow, methodical card isn't really what Green Red Devotion's interested in. Its cards are very polarized in that they're either mana creatures or they're cards with huge payoff. And Hangerback Walker doesn't really fit into either of those categories.
That makes sense. You know, it's easy because like, you look at Hangerback Walker, you look at a deck that can make a bunch of mana, and you say,
yeah, it says X in it.
Yeah, this should probably be in here, but you know, you can say the same thing for Crater's Claws, and not everyone plays that in this deck either, and Steve Mann's not running any this particular weekend. So the slots, you know, they can be negotiated in this deck, but it almost feels like with Green Red Devotion, you're locked into like 52 cards right away.
Yeah, and it's just, think about the payoff with the X's. You know, if you have 8 mana, you could play a Dragonlord Atarka, or you could play a Hangerback Walker on 4. The Hangerback Walker on 4 doesn't have that much payoff to it. Sure, it's a good play, but it can trade with some kill spells. It'll just make you incremental value over time, and that incremental value isn't what the Devotion deck's interested in.
Yeah, that's legitimate. It wants to do something a little bit more splashy, a little bit bigger than that. Like you said, Dragonlord Atarka, that costs 8, so does Hangerback Walker for 4. I'll take Dragonlord Atarka every time.
Yeah.
Now, one card that Goss does have in his sideboard, and you know, it's a card that we have not seen very much of this weekend during the standard portion, though it does play a huge role in this matchup, is Tragic Arrogance. As we saw in that last game from Steve Mann, they like to flood the board with a bunch of stuff, and Tragic Arrogance really does punish you for doing that. So, to me, it might be John's most important card in the sideboard.
Well, yeah, Steve's deck is a deck that plays mana creatures, and is trying to build up devotion for Nykthos. He is priced into committing to the board. He may know about Tragic Arrogance or even expect it, but it's not like he can play around it. You know, holding a mana creature in your hand isn't a reasonable thing to do.
They just have to put everything on the table.
You're right. You play out your hand. What Steve would like to hope then is that the thing he ramps into is strong enough that he doesn't particularly care when his board gets swept. You know, something like if he manages to Genesis Hydra into a Xenagos, okay, this is fine. You can Tragic Arrogance on this board.
Both players are going to take a look at their opening hands. Steve Mann on the draw, John Goss on the play. John with a great start last game, but it was not good enough. Jason a double Mantis Rider. Steve was able to overpower that. John's got to hope that doesn't happen again. But I think that John would want the exact same draw just on the play.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Jason to 2 Mantis Riders is pretty excellent here. On the play, he gets 6 more damage off the Mantis Riders. Now, It did turn out that that may have not been enough to win there. Steve had a great hand. But if you mix in something like a Disdainful Stroke, then John's hand definitely gets there.
Yeah. John's going to take a mulligan. Steve will sit tight with his 7 cards. So we'll see if Goss can find a better 6 to work with. He's got plenty of cards to sideboard out in this matchup. Draconic Roar, not really an MVP here. Magma Spray is pretty mediocre. It does kill Elvish Mystic, and it also kills Rattleclaw Mystic, but I'm not sure if that's exactly where you want to be. You probably want to try to battle the high-end threats. That's why you see a card like Disdainful Stroke come in.
Right, and well, he doesn't have to be as fast, because cards like Tragic Arrogance and Anger of the Gods will get him back into a game. He can let Steve extend into a triple mana creature threat like last game, and then just simply clean it up with Anger of the Gods.
Yeah. So it's got to be nice for John that he can actually play a little bit of a longer game after sideboard, because it feels like the first game, he's got to get it over with as fast as possible.
Right. Once we said Steve could untap with 7 mana on turn 4,
yeah.
I mean, you're thinking on John's side, well, he'd better have a counter spell, or a sweeper, which he didn't have any of in the main. John is on, game 1, he's on the line of, I sure hope that 7 drop's not too good.
Yeah, or hopefully he just never draws one.
Right.
Temple of Epiphany is where John's going to start. That top card is going to go to the bottom now, so we'll head Steve Mann's way. Basic Mountain and just a passing of the turn. Rarely do we see the Green Red Devotion deck start off with that. For Goss, he'll just play a Plains and pass the turn back. You have to imagine, because Steve kept his opening, he's got some green mana. There we go.
It does look like Steve's interested in a race, at least to a certain point. He's brought in cards like Nylea's Disciple.
Draconic Roar there for John. A little surprised to see that in after sideboard. I do understand wanting to have removal for those mana creatures, but, you know, there are times when Draconic Roar is going to line up actually pretty poorly for him.
Well, my worry would be if he has a hand with Anger of the Gods and Draconic Roar, say that situation, then do you even want to use Draconic Roar in that situation?
Yeah.
What you're doing is, by playing Draconic Roar, is you're consigning your Anger of the Gods to be a 1-for-1, which I would hope to get more of out of the card.
I think you have to get more out of that card in this matchup. John just going to pass the turn back. It looks like he picked up a copy of Magma Spray for the turn, too.
Yeah, so he has a lot of that cheap removal in. And it does make sense. Game 1, he lost to a flood of small creatures. I could see him wanting to aggressively go after Steve's mana. That said, if John doesn't present a threat, Steve can just play lands and then play 5-drops, and that'll be very efficient here.
There's Pelucranos.
Right. He doesn't have to ramp, as we're seeing.
A Valorous Stance will take care of that.
And I don't dislike what John's doing here, but this would be a lot more effective if he had really, I mean, obviously a Mantis Rider or even a Soulfire Grandmaster in play.
Just something out there getting to work.
Right, when these cards trade, he's not gaining any value. So eventually he'll have to start trading with Steve's larger threats. But Steve's threats are designed in such a way that they don't trade very well. Genesis Hydra, Whisperwood Elemental, they get additional values. That when you trade with them, Steve will get something left over.
That's a Morph, a Forest, and Mann will pass the turn back over to Goss. Goss has another removal spell here, but I don't really like how this game is going for him right now.
Yeah,
it's kind of trading and stuff for these burn spells. Yeah, I mean, they get to do something, but John's got to draw some action.
If John's deck had a Treasure Cruise in it, then it'd be great.
Yeah, I would like
okay
that.
with this. If he had a creature in play like this, there's a lot of things that he could be doing that would make this acceptable. He does have 2 copies of Dig Through Time. If one's in his hand, this is more reasonable. It is interesting to see him go to Dig Through Time. Typically, we've seen Jeskai decks be heavier on Treasure Cruise when they get to pick between the two. It shows that he's definitely become more of a mid-ranged dragon-style deck than what you'd come to expect.
I think he finally found a flyer. This was important that he finally got somewhere with this.
Absolutely. He needs to get some damage on the board.
So Mantis Rider is here, and it's coming across for 3.
Steve has played 5 basic lands this game.
He has a copy of Arbor Colossus in hand. Make it 6 basics, and the first Arbor Colossus.
Right, someone out of the sideboard. It's there to deal with creatures just like Mantis Rider. Puts pressure on John to have another Valorous Stance.
Yeah, Arbor Colossus is not particularly easy to burn out.
No, and he doesn't have many answers to it. He has 1 Jeskai Charm, 3 Valorous Stance, 1 Elspeth Sun's Champion. That's it for answers in his deck. I suppose Tragic Arrogance if Steven plays another creature.
Yeah.
This guy can be a brick wall.
And Steve gets the opportunity to untap with it. I think Mantis Rider is going to bite the dust from that monstrosity trigger.
And I think the play John is contemplating is he has another copy of Draconic Roar in hand.
Oh, no.
I mean, he may be priced into that line. Certainly he doesn't want the monstrosity to shoot down the Mantis Rider.
Yeah. The thing here, if you're Steve,
don't block.
Yeah, just don't block.
The only danger of Steve of taking 3 and activating Arbor Colossus would be if the John has Valorous Stance, it would be a blowout. But if John has Valorous Stance, I don't think this attack would have been made.
Yep. Now, what's interesting about this, too, is just take a look at Steve's hand. He's got a copy of Drangler Tarka and the 7th land in hand of Wooded Foothills. So he could say, all right, I'll block, make you have a removal spell and go, all right, now here's an 8/8.
Yeah. He also has Nylea's Disciple, so what's 3 damage?
That's very true. Very, very true.
No.
So Steve just is going to take the 3, a decision I definitely agree with.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit here.
Courser of Crewfix the draw, so now he could even just go Courser into Nylea's Disciple.
Courser, gain a life off a land drop, Nylea's Disciple. He'd end the turn at 22.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, be perfectly fine with that exchange.
And actually what I like about Steve's draw here is we talked about how he had to, kind of play face first into cards like Tragic Arrogance and possible sweepers. The way this game is shaping up, Steve is actually insulating himself very well against those kinds of cards. Mann's
going to start with the Courser. That's in there. We'll take a look at the top card, Dragon Lord Tarka. Here comes the Wooded Foothills. That'll trigger the Courser. Mann will gain a life. We'll see if he wants to sacrifice the Foothills, which means he'll have to shuffle away the Dragon Lord Tarka.
Yeah, it is his second copy, so he may want to do that. At the same time, having 2 Atarkas in this matchup is not that bad, because it means if John kills one or counters one, Steve has another one, and it's very hard for John to win when Atarka's in play.
Okay. He will sacrifice the Wooded Foothills. He'll lose 1, and then he'll gain 1 back, so he'll stay at the same life total.
Steve doing all this pre-combat in case there's some combination of cards that kills the Arbor Colossus. Steve wants to make sure he gets full life gain.
Top card's a Forest now.
I do think Steve suspects Draconic Roar here.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely playing around some sort of damage spell. He saw Roast last game.
Yeah. So if it's Roast, this attack is safe. If it's Draconic Roar, it's not. At the same time, Steve isn't actually under pressure to attack. The pressure he's under, I suppose, is since he only has 1 other finisher in his hand, if he lets this game go on a lot of turns, John could start doing things like chaining Dig through times to actually outclass the Devotion deck.
Looks like he might be coming in here with Arbor Colossus, though. He's going to gain all that life in Nylea Disciple. Up to 22. But I think if I'm Steve in this position, given my hand, Dragon Lord Tarka, and given Arbor Colossus, I'm just hanging. Just gonna.
You maybe have a turn to get maximum value. Yeah.
Might just hang out, not do too much. Just go ahead. Not gonna run my Arbor Colossus into anything.
Suppose the big downside is now if John has something like Tragic Arrogance, he'll have missed 6 damage.
Yeah.
But his deck doesn't win the game in multiples of 6. When his deck wins, it deals damage in multiples of 20. You know, as we saw last game, once Steve was ahead, the life total wasn't an issue.
He's really far ahead then.
Right. So yeah, Sound is saying, hey, you missed 6 damage. That sounds bad, but it's not as bad for his deck as it would seem.
This is 5 mana. It's a copy of Tragic Arrogance. So, John Goss is going to let Steve Mann keep Courser of Crewfix. He'll lose the rest, and then John will get to keep his Mantis Rider.
So he actually, you'd wondering why he wouldn't pick Nylea's Disciples. Courser's the better card. He has to pick an enchantment as well as a creature.
Sure.
So he already has to pick the Courser, so he might as well pick it to be the creature as well, because Courser will survive no matter how he stacks that turn.
Temple of Bandon is going to enter the battlefield. We've got 2 triggers here. 1 Scry, 1 from Courser. Dragon Lord Tarka has shown up again.
And, well, here's another one.
That's going to take out Mantis Rider. Now Courser's free to attack.
So John knows he has to beat not 1, but 2 Dragon Lord Atarkas.
That's super easy to do.
And if he manages to do it, well, Courser will be in play the entire time, so more threats will be served up.
This is really what Green Red Devotion is all about. Again, on the surface, I think that this matchup was probably good for John. I love Flyers. Everyone loves Mantis Rider against Green Red Devotion. It's a dream card for the matchup. You love Thunderbreak Region, you love Stormbreath Dragon, you love Jeskai's ability to burn you out once he gets ahead. These cards have not lined up great here. Here's Tragic Arrogance again.
Kill the Atarka.
And that's just a 5 mana removal spell, though.
But you like it. I like how the deck can operate very differently. In game 1, we saw Steve be a fast ramp deck. Lots of mana creatures into quick 7 drops. Game 2, Steve played 1 basic land a turn all the way up to Dragon Lord Atarka, and is now just using Courser of Crewfix to serve up threat after threat.
Yeah, no ramp necessary. Carry added, Rattleclaw Mystic, Elvish Mystic, didn't need them.
While John's hand is good at counterpunching, he's got 2 Tragic Arrogances in the graveyard, a Disdainful Stroke in hand. This Courser puts enough pressure on him that he doesn't seem to be able to pull ahead.
Interesting turn by Steve there. Had the opportunity to just play Dragon Lord Tarka on that board.
That's so greedy. The fact that he doesn't want the 8/8, wants to. I mean, it shows no rush on his side, right? An 8/8 would be a great threat here, but I think instead he just wants to continue to have any sort of possible answer to a creature that John would play.
And, you know, I do think that exchange is okay. Just to say, okay, I'm not going to play anything. when you play something, I'll play something. If you have Stormbreath Dragon or Thunderbreak Regent, then I'll play my Dragula Atarka, because I know I'm drawing Genesis Hydra for the turn, and that's going to bring something along with it.
Yeah, and I think the Genesis Hydra may have factored into that decision, because now John leaves up a Disdainful Stroke, which I'm sure Steve is aware of, but casting a Genesis Hydra into that seems completely acceptable.
Yeah.
It looks like it's just going to be a Hydra for 5.
Yeah, I think he said 7, yeah, and
Got
just
it.
tapped his man a little bit funny there. Take a look at the top 7 cards. Dragula Atarka just showing up.
So many of them.
2 of them in there, along with the Pelucranos. Some other irrelevant cards.
Well, at least John knows where all the Atarkas are now.
Yeah. They're either in Steve's hand or on the battlefield. Neither zone beatable.
Steve here just takes the Atarka. Had an option at Pelucranos.
I'm not passing up an 8/8 flyer.
Sure is bigger. And now we'll see whether John has to Disdainful Stroke that Hydra anyway.
Yeah, one thing to remember with Genesis Hydra, you can't counter the card that comes in off of Genesis Hydra.
Exactly. You can't counter the Hydra.
Yeah.
That's still just a 7/7, so
That's it.
just a 7. I mean, this is 15 power. John's at 14. He may have to make a play on the Hydra.
I'm not thrilled if I'm John to have to Disdainful Stroke that, but gotta do what you gotta do.
Well, counterspelling against that guy is a necessary evil.
Well, that's Steve Mann's turn, so we're gonna head back John Goss's way now.
Can he? How many of these 8/8s can he deal with?
He's tapping a bunch of mana. Okay.
All right, Elspeth, she can -3 to take care of an Atarka. Now remember, Atarka's ability divides damage among creatures and planeswalkers. So Steve will get to answer this this Elspeth with his next Atarka. But John, that will put John 1 removal spell away from possibly stabilizing. Does he have it? He doesn't have too many removal spells for Atarka. He's already gone through 1 Valor stance and 1 Elspeth. He's got two stances left. And that's about it.
Another interesting play there from Steve. He's got a Sylvan Caryatid in his hand. He elected not to cast it.
Tragic Arrogance would certainly be tragic
Yep.
if he played that Caryatid. Remember, you choose a creature, so you can still choose the hexproof card.
I think it's really smart that he didn't play that turn. Now, we know that John only has 2 copies of Tragic Arrogance in his sideboard, and he's cast them both this game. But Steve can elect to just play around that effect because he doesn't know how many John has. I think it's very smart.
Another land from Mann. John's taking 1 hit off the Atarka. 1 more would be lethal. Remember, John has the ability to maybe dig through time into a Valor stance. Does he have an answer to the Atarka? We will see. Or can he find one, rather?
Yeah? Thunderbreak Regent. It's a blocker.
Yeah, he has. That is exactly what he's at.
Sort of helps. Yep.
Swing, he'll block.
Little trample damage there from Atarka.
Right? Data does have trample. John goes to 1.
Sets his Flooded Strand aside. Not going to be needing this game.
Does he find the Delve spell? Or the Valorous Stance? His last card was Draconic Roar there. Almost had enough damage to deal with the Atarka, but in the end, he does not.
Steve Mann going to win this game and match here over John Goss. 2-0. Green-Red Devotion will take care of Jeskai Dragons. For Mann, he moves on to 12-3. And I don't think that 12-3-1 is going to be good enough. It's very unclear, but I imagine that Steve will probably have to play the next round.
Yes, some number of the 11-3s may be able to draw, but if I were Steve, I would brace myself for 1 more fight.
Well, if he draws like that, I think he'll be just fine.
Yeah, made it through a matchup which was on the tougher end of things for him.
On paper, looked pretty bad.